In this unit, we're going to be going over data, samples, as well as population. Okay, that's the title of our unit. So it's basically a lot of statistical stuff. It's being able to look at charts, data, graphs, things of that nature, and being able to pull information from it or make inferences about it. Okay, so we're going to be going over circle graphs, we're going to be going over bar graphs, we're going to be going over dot plots, as well as box and whisker. So those are going to be the main four that we're going over this unit, but we'll add histograms as well at the end. Okay, so let's start with this one. This is a circle graph, otherwise known as a pie chart. So if you see the word pie chart, just know that it's the same thing as a circle graph. Now, what is the purpose? What does this do? As you can see, you have percentages here. And with those percentages, you have categories. And depending on how many of those categories they are, they get a bigger slice of the pie. Okay? So all this is showing us is a visual representation of the relative size of the data. It gives us a visual representation of the size of the data. That is the purpose of a circle graph. So just by looking at the circle graph, I could see that TVs are the smallest amount. Even if it didn't have that 3% here, I could still visually look at the circle graph and tell that, hey, TVs are clicked on far less than cell phones. Okay? So now, the entire circle contains 100% of the data. So if I add up all of these individual pieces of the pie, I'm going to add up to 100%. I'm going to get a sum of 100%. Okay? Now, in order to solve questions like this, you're most likely going to have to create or set up a proportion. So for proportions, remember, we have percent over 100 is equal to the part over the whole or the part over the total. So let's just go ahead and read this and do a couple of problems. During 1 month, there were 2,000 people who used the advertiser links on a website. The percent of people is shown below in the circle graph. How many people clicked on the cell phone link? Okay, so there are two ways we could go about this. First off, though, let's go ahead and set up a proportion. So I'm talking specifically about the cell phone link. So for the cell phone link, we had 32%, and that's out of 100%. This side is the percent side. Now, this is my actual side with the actual numbers. I know for sure that there were 2,000 people here, all right? But I don't know how many people is 32% of 2,000, okay? So I could go about this a couple of ways. The first way is to set up a direct proportion or multiply by its scale or scale multiple. All right, so what that looks like is just what number multiplied by 100 will give me 2,000. Well, if I take 2,000 and if I divide that by 100, I'm going to get a value of 20. So it's going to be multiplied by 20, and just point your arrow in the correct direction and then multiply here by 20. All right, so in this case, my x is going to be equal to 32 multiplied by 20, which will give me 640 people. Okay, now whenever you have numbers that could evenly go in, or if you have like multiplied by like 2.5 or something like that, the direct proportion is the way to go. But sometimes it could get a little bit more complicated, and then you'll have to do cross multiplication in order to solve it. Okay, so let's just see what cross multiplication looks like. We have 32 over 100 is going to be equal to x over 2,000. So with cross multiplication, I'm just multiplying these two numbers together. So we have 2,000 multiplied by 32. So 2,000 times 32 will give us 64,000. Yes, 64,000. And then we have 100 multiplied by x, which will give us a value of equals 100x. So now if I just divide by 100 and divide by 100, getting our algebraic practice back in, those zeros are out, those zeros are out, I'm left with 640. Okay, so I could either do the direct proportion way or the cross multiplication way. In this case, though, it doesn't make sense to do the cross multiplication way because the direct proportion way is so much easier. Okay, now let's go ahead and take a look at number 2. How many people clicked on the movie link? So let's just go ahead and, once again, we already know our scale factor. So at this point, these problems are a little bit easier. So we have 100, and then we have our movie link. Our movie link is 17. We already know we're going to have to multiply by 20. So 17 times 20 is going to give me my x value. 17 multiplied by 20 will give me 340 people. All right. Now, with these statistic questions, it'll most likely ask you to compare your data. So for the third question, it says, how many more people clicked on the cell phone link than the movie link? So we have 640 people for the cell phone, and then 340 people for the movie. So that's going to be 0, 0. It's going to be 300 people. All right? And it's really as simple as that. It'll get more complicated later on in the course, and of course, if you're on advanced, it'll get a little bit more complicated. You'll most likely have to use the cross multiplication as opposed to the direct proportion. But that's basically how you do it. You'll have to set up a proportion for almost all of these problems in this unit. Okay? So let's just go ahead and try a second example, and then that'll be it for this video. Fairy Publishers publish a variety of weekly magazines. They sold 5,500 magazines in a day. They record the number of magazines sold in each type. They made a pie chart to represent the information. All right, so notice how I use pie chart as opposed to circle graph. It's the same thing. So how many fashion magazines were sold? All right, so for a fashion magazine, we have 13% out of 100%, and we know that there were a total of 5,500 sold. Okay? So with a direct proportion, all I need to do is multiply by 55 and then multiply by 55. So my x value is going to be 715, what is these? Magazines. Okay? So for this one, we'll have 715. How many business and health and fitness magazines were sold? So business is here, which is 8. Health and fitness is here, which is 24. So 24 plus 8 is going to give me 32. So we have 32% out of 100%. I could go ahead and just combine them. I can calculate them separately and then combine them at the very end, but it'll just be easier to combine them right now. So this is going to be x over, once again, 5,500. I already know my scale factor, so I know I'm going to multiply by 55. So x is going to be equal to 1,760 magazines. All right, and then lastly, this is when it gets a little bit more interesting. All right, so we're just going to change our denominator here for this one and see how our numbers change. So if 2,200 magazines were sold in a day, how many would be sports magazines? Okay, so we do not know how many will be sports magazines, but we do know that sports magazines is 19% out of 100. Now, it's saying we sold 2,200 as opposed to 5,500. So in my total now, it's 2,200. You have to watch out for that, okay? Now we're going to multiply by 22 and then multiply by 22. So 19 times 22, x is equal to 418 magazines. All right, and that's it for now in terms of circle graphs.